I'm at the British Museum, and instead of doing a typical highlights tour today, we're going to walk through my favorite topic, which is the weird, the strange, and the downright macabre. That's right, this is a tour of the weirdest objects on display at the British Museum.
This is truly one of my favorite topics. This is the kind of tour I dream of taking whenever I visit a museum. We're starting with the crystal skull, a legendary fake, before going to look at a circus sideshow gaff, the FeeJee Mermaid. Then we'll look at Dr. John Dee's magical wax seals used for rituals and occult magic, before going to room 41, where Banksy installed Peckham Rock. We'll head over to room 70 to see the rather spicy Cleopatra's lamp, before going to look at the mummified cats in room 62. We'll investigate some ancient Egyptian true crime at the Gebelein man, before heading back downstairs to talk about corpse medicine, the practice of eating human flesh in front of an empty mummy's case. I'm just entering into the ever spectacular Great Court of the British Museum, and I'm making my way to room number 24. Room number 24 is the Wellcome Trust Gallery of Living and Dying, and if you're interested in seeing a video just about the fascinating Wellcome collection, let me know in the comments below. Now I'm entering into room 24 to have a look at an object that some people may question whether it even belongs in a museum at all. This is a crystal skull, a mythical and storied object that has spawned many legends and conspiracy theories. Now, this specific crystal skull was purchased from the jewelers Tiffany of New York in the late 1890s. At that time, crystal skulls were thought to be originally from pre-Hispanic Mexico, and that they were used for ancient rituals and all kind of magic. Some people actually thought that this skull might be from Central Asia or Japan, but by the 1890s, people were pretty convinced that this skull was Mexican. But is it? In more recent years, the museum has used technology and subject matter expertise to try to verify the skull's origins, and they haven't been all that successful. The skull's features do line up with genuine Aztec or Miztec carvings, but the overall appearance just isn't like that of any Mesoamerican art style. That's right, the skull is likely a fake. The last time the British Museum Research Laboratory examined the skull, they said it appeared that the teeth had been cut with a jeweler's wheel and not with technology that would have been available to ancient Aztecs. The actual rock crystal itself likely comes from Brazil, which makes its pre-Hispanic date unlikely, as this type of mining is more recent in Brazil. The actual craftsmanship was likely done in the late 19th century. It seems that the European fascination with Mesoamerican crystal skulls may actually be a long, long con. Instead, this skull is estimated to be somewhere from the mid to late 1800s, at a time when public interest in ancient cultures of all kinds was high, and museums like the Smithsonian and like the British Museum were eager for pieces to put on display. This was probably made in an area of Germany that was famous for manufacturing intricate quartz in the 19th century. The crystals probably from Brazil or maybe even Madagascar, and therefore it would not have been accessible to pre-industrial indigenous civilizations. The British Museum therefore believes that all of the famous crystal skulls are likely fakes. No such skull has ever been uncovered at an official archaeological excavation. After all, where do you likely see crystal skulls? That's right, places like Nancy Drew, Indiana Jones, and comic books. Now I'm leaving behind room number 24, and I'm going to head to one of my favorite rooms in the entire museum. I'm heading towards room number 1, which is the Enlightenment Gallery. The second item on our tour, and we're going to talk about another object of dubious origin. Well, in just a moment, I'm going to zoom in on this display case, and you'll have to excuse a bit of the glare because I want to look at this strange creature. So what the heck is it? This is a FeeJee Mermaid, though it's not spelled the way that you might think. It's spelled Feejee. This strange mermaid is far from being the only one in the world. They are in many of the world's museums, and there are many more in former circus sideshow collections. In fact, they are one of the most common circus sideshow gaffs, originally made famous by the legendary circus man P.T. Barnum. FeeJee mermaids owe their existence to Japanese folklore, specifically the ningyo, a word that translates to human fish. Ningyo bring bad weather and death, so if a fisherman catches one, he needs to throw it back in the sea. But let's talk a little bit more about P.T. Barnum. Did you know that before he started many famous circuses, he was a museum owner? That's right. The connection between museums and entertainment runs deep. That's probably why I love museums so much. His American Museum in New York City housed all kinds of oddities, including his so-called FeeJee Mermaid, which he said had been found in the Polynesian tropics. And he, of course, said it depicted a real-life mermaid, causing thousands of people to queue up to go and have a look. But as people streamed into the museum, they were treated not to a beautiful young maiden, but a desiccated chimera like this one. A hired naturalist was not able to determine how the fake was made, so he was forced to say, it's inconclusive. This being inconclusive was even better for P.T. Barnum than a certificate of authenticity, because of course, now everybody in New York wanted to come in and have a look for themselves. There's a famous quote often attributed to P.T. Barnum. There's a sucker born every minute. Now, he didn't actually say that, but he did say,
I don't believe in duping the public, but I believe in first attracting them and then pleasing them.
He would actually go on to start rumors that loads of his other items, even real ones, were fakes. The controversy was just too profitable. This particular FeeJee mermaid was donated to the museum by one of Queen Victoria's grandsons, Prince Arthur, Duke of Connaught. And it was said to have been, quote, caught in Japan in the 18th century. According to the museum, they've chosen to keep it here, even though it is a fake, because the merman is displayed in the Enlightenment Gallery. In this context, it helps to show how museums changed during the 18th century, from cabinets of curiosity to the type of museums we are now more familiar with today. The mermaid is likely made of a fish's tail sewn onto a block of wood and embellished with leather and plaster, with sharp fish's teeth added. There's another really famous FeeJee mermaid in London. It's located at the Horniman Museum. Do you want me to include that in a Strangest Objects in London museums video? Let me know. Or if you just want to see a tour of the Horniman, I'm also happy to go and do that. Always love getting over to that part of London. Now, I'm going to turn and we're going to start walking to the other end of the gallery. Here's one that I only just learned of while researching this video. I could spend all day in this gallery. You'll probably hear me say that a lot. I really mean it. But for now, we're back to a truly strange object. This is Dr. John Dee's magical discs and his shoe stone, and they date to the mid-16th century. John Dee created these wax discs and this obsidian mirror, which he called a shoe stone, S-H-E-W, to contact angels and spirits. John Dee was one of the leading intellectuals of his time, and he is absolutely fascinating. I could do an entire video just about him and his life, so let me know if you'd be interested in that.
John Dee was a physician, an astronomer, an occultist, a mathematician, and he was the court astronomer for Queen Elizabeth I.
He left her service in search of occult knowledge, and he was accused of being a spy, and he eventually died in relative obscurity in 1608 or 1609. Remember, at this time in European history, mathematics was akin to magic. People didn't quite trust it. After all, think of how we still use the word calculating to describe someone with dishonorable intentions. In 1582, Dr. Dee created this series of wax discs that would anchor his holy table, which was part of an elaborate magical ritual to contact the angels and the dead. The table was topped with the obsidian mirror that you can see here, which was used for scrying or fortune-telling, which would have been his partner Edward Kelly, who was a seer. Each disc is inscribed with the sigillum Dei, or the sigil of God. A sigil is a symbol that is thought to have magical powers. This one is comprised of 2 circles, a pentagram and 3 heptagons. They contain the names of the 7 archangels. All around the edge of the disc, you can see the, quote, full name of God, which is comprised of 72 Latin letters. John Dee did not create the Sigillum Dei. It first appears in the Sworn Book of Honorius, a spell book dating to before 1347. Dee probably owned a copy of this book. He also believed that angels spoke in a language called Enochian, and he and Kelly wrote a series of books in that language. This was all leading up to an elaborate ritual, but they never got a chance to do it. They had a scandalous falling out. So what do you think? Was John Dee communicating with angels and the dead? No matter what you believe, this entire display case that I'm looking at now all contains objects used throughout ancient and more recent, well, if you count the middle of the 16th century recent, history to communicate with people in the afterlife, angels, and otherworldly beings. Don't miss it when you come to the museum. Now we're going to head out of room number 1 now. We're going to make our way upstairs. We're going to go and have a look at something that's no longer there. You've probably heard of a museum heist, but have you heard of someone sneaking something into a museum? That's exactly what enigmatic British street artist Banksy did in 2005 with some guerrilla museum work here in this gallery. He installed a piece in the Roman Britain Gallery, right on the wall, and believe it or not, it stayed on that wall for 3 days. As you can see, the piece depicts a bison, a spiky person, and a grocery cart. Banksy called the piece Peckham Rock, and it even had an official label that included a title, description, and a fake identification number, which is called an accession number. I've worked in a lot of museums over the years and worked in both curation departments and museum interpretation departments. So let me know if you'd like a video on any of that kind of stuff. Even the name Peckham Rock includes a cheeky joke, as Peckham is a gentrifying part of South London known for its vibrant Nigerian community, its street art, and its hipsters. So here's what the plaque said. This finely preserved example of primitive art dates to the post-catatonic era and is thought to depict an early man venturing towards the out-of-town hunting grounds. The artist responsible is known to have created a substantial body of work across the southeast of England under the moniker Banksimus Maximus, but little else is known about him. Most art of this type has unfortunately not survived. The majority is destroyed by zealous municipal officials who fail to recognize the artistic merit and historic value of daubing on walls. Of course, there's some commentary there as well, because Banksy's work often does get taken down or destroyed by people who don't realize it's there. The museum staff didn't actually notice the Banksy piece amongst all of these other Roman objects that I'm panning and walking around right now, because until they actually saw it on Banksy's own website. Of course, it's a good laugh, but Peckham Rock asks us all kinds of questions about what's worth hanging in a museum. What has, quote, museum quality value? I mean, look, there's a blank wall right there. Could we put something else on it? What belongs here, and who gets to decide what goes here?
The museum clearly believes that the object has value because they brought it back for a temporary exhibit called I Object, which explored objects of dissent in the museum and other contexts.
Of course, the strangest thing about this whole piece of Banksy art in the British Museum thing is that we don't actually know who Banksy is. We know he's a Bristol street artist, movie director, and political activist. We know he's been active for more than 20 years, and rumors have swirled since he reached global fame in the late aughties. The most common theory is that he's Robert Del Naja, Robin Gunningham, or even a collective of artists led by a woman. If you want to watch me guide some Banksy pieces, check out the video I did for Free Tours by Foot, a company that I guide with a lot. Now, we're going to make our way out of room number 49 and head to another gallery famous for its ancient objects, which is room 70. Let me know what other parts of the British Museum or other parts of any other London museums you'd be interested in learning more about. But here, I've just entered into room 70, and I'm going to make my way to a case at the very back of the room, or the front of the room, depending on where you enter. The piece I'm going to look at now is actually really tiny. It's called the, quote, Cleopatra lamp, and it's the spiciest object on our tour today. There it is there. That little tiny object. It would have been an oil-burning lamp. It dates to about 35 BCE, so it's more than 2,000 years old, but this story might not be the most appropriate for kids. So this lamp depicts a crocodile, which was the emblem of Egypt, and it has a large phallus for a tail.
Straddled on top of the tail is a female figure, and it's likely Cleopatra, and let's just say it's not a compliment.
While the lamp's origins are not fully clear, it was most likely created as a part of one of history's most successful propaganda campaigns. This was a massive attempt by supporters of Octavian, later known as the Emperor Augustus, against Mark Antony and Cleopatra. At this time in Rome, rumors were swirling about Antony and Cleopatra's decadent way of life. In contrast, Octavian claimed that he was the moral alternative to their supposedly debauched ways. This lamp, therefore, would have been a really harsh dig at Cleopatra, and it was designed to strengthen Octavian's claim that he was Julius Caesar's rightful successor. As a powerful woman, Cleopatra was forever defined by her romantic relationships, and it was her personal life, not her leadership capabilities, that attracted gossip and propaganda. That's not at all similar today. I mean, sarcasm. This lamp was once in the secretum, which is also known as the, quote, porn room, because it was too spicy for Victorian tastes. However, remember that this was not really an object of titillation. Instead, it was state-sanctioned propaganda that was designed to sully Cleopatra's reputation. It worked. I'm now just walking into the Egyptian galleries, and things are about to get pretty busy. When I think of mummies, I tend to think of the sarcophagi and wrapped humans that you see in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, in the Louvre, Metropolitan Museum of Art, and of course here in the British Museum. There are tens of thousands of mummies that have been found and continue to be found. However, there are also literally millions of mummified animals in Egypt. Just like we do today, ancient Egyptians kept beloved pets. These pets included cats, dogs, monkeys, birds, gazelles, and even mongooses, which is a pretty strange pet, but okay. While cats were worshipped and venerated in ancient Egypt, that's not the only reason they were mummified. They were mummified because they were pets, and people believed that mummifying them ensured they would join their owners in the afterlife. I have a dog called Artie, and I can understand wanting to be with your dog in your idea of heaven. However, they were also considered good offerings to various gods. Cats especially were thought to be the incarnation of the cat god Bastet, as she had the head of a cat and a woman's body. Finally, some animals were mummified so they could serve as food in the afterlife. Hopefully not these cats. Looking at them, they do kind of remind me of the FeeJee Mermaid that we saw downstairs. But these are real cats that are inside these mummies. They're not circus sideshow gaffs. These animal mummies are not as old as the other human mummies that you see here in the British Museum. After all, important individuals had been mummified for more than 5,000 years before the first animals were mummified. For instance, the cat mummies in this case date to around 30 BCE, about 2,000 years ago. Animal offerings had previously been made of bronze, but by this era it was actually cheaper to mummify real animals. Therefore, they become much more common around this time period. Before being mummified, an animal's body would be dried out and then filled with soil or sand. They would be arranged in a lifelike position and then wrapped up with linen.
Now at this time, animal mummies were straight up mass produced. There are millions upon millions of them in different cemeteries around Egypt, most notably at the funerary complex at Saqqara. In fact, in the middle of the 19th century, so many animal mummies were being excavated that millions of them were sent to the UK and used as fertiliser for fields in Liverpool.
That's right. By the way, did you know that in medieval and the early modern periods, people in Europe and around Asia used to eat the human mummies by crushing them up and putting them in tinctures and medicines? I'm going to come back to that in a few stops. Here, we're just going to have a quick look at some of the mummified bulls and bull effigies, which were also really common at this time period. I'm going to make my way through to a different part of the Egyptian galleries, now making our way over to room 64. Now I'm just walking towards room 64, so we can have a look at the penultimate object on our Strangest Objects of the British Museum tour. We're going to go look at a piece of ancient true crime. Now, true crime's having a bit of a moment these days. Podcasts and books and loads of documentaries. And people really do love true crime because it allows them to externalize their fears and then consume them back as entertainment, which makes them, I guess, less scary. Kind of like watching horror movies. The case that we're going to have a look at is a case of true crime more than 5,000 years in the making. That's because we're going to talk about the Gebelein man, also referred to affectionately as Ginger by the museum staff because of the shock of ginger hair that this natural mummy still has. Back in 2012, one of the museum's oldest humans was taken off-site for an autopsy using the latest CT scan technologies to find out his cause of death. The Gebelein man is a naturally preserved mummy. He was buried around 3500 BCE, maybe even earlier, and that's more than 5,500 years ago, at the site of Gebelein in Upper Egypt. So normally when we think of an Egyptian mummy, we think of a man-made preservation ritual. It's just like we saw with the cats a few minutes ago. However, Gebelein man was mummified naturally. Since the air is so hot and dry, he was mummified by the sand, and you can see how the museum continues to preserve him in his optimal climate. In September 2012, the Gebelein man was carefully taken to the Cromwell Hospital in London. There, they created detailed images and 3D models from high-resolution X-rays, which allowed pathologists and forensic archaeologists to look around inside his body and learn more about his life and death. He was the first pre-dynastic mummy to ever receive a CT scan. By the way, some of the FeeJee Mermaids have had CT scans as well, which that's just hilarious to me. Here's where the strange true crime details come into play with Gebelein man. The CT scan revealed that Ginger was actually very young when he died. He was only 18 to 21 years old.
Now this wasn't too shocking, but the researchers were shocked to find out that the Gebelein man had actually been stabbed in the back.
Tragically, That means Gebelein man, or Ginger, died a gruesome and violent death, with a gash on his back and damage to his shoulder blade and ribs. These injuries point to a single fatal wound. And so there's the mystery. Who killed Ginger and why? Probably need a new series of Serial to figure this out. We are now back where we started, in room number 1, the Enlightenment Gallery. In fact, I'm just a couple centimeters away from the FeeJee Mermaid. Now here is another instance where I'm going to show you the absence of something rather than its presence. That's because this mummy's coffin is empty. Now, in this case, we do know that the mummified remains of a man called Urtiru is in another part of the museum. But there are lots of empty mummy coffins in the British Museum and many other places around the world, and we can take a darn good guess what happened to the ones in Europe and across Asia. It's what happened to thousands of other mummies in the 16th, 17th, and even 18th and 19th centuries. We ate them. No, you heard me correctly. We ate them. An unknown number of the mummies brought to Europe during this period were scraped, powdered, and then included in tinctures and medicines called mummia. We also crushed them up and used them for painting, hence the paint color mummy brown. And believe it or not, we use them for fertilizer for farming. When you see the term mummia, it actually has a few different meanings. The term originally referred to Arabic, mumia, which was a, quote, type of resinous bitumen found in Western Asia and used curatively. But fast forward to medieval Europe, and the term starts to mean both that bituminous medicine from Persia and mummy itself. Historians think that this was actually a misunderstanding, seriously. People saw the word mumia and they thought mummy. Realizing that bitumen supplies were low, people redefined the word to mean the black resinous exudate scraped out from embalmed Egyptian mummies. I wish I were kidding, and I'm not. Egyptian tomb raiders could earn a good living supplying Europeans with their desired mummies. By the 16th century, Egypt banned this practice, and that's when Europeans really stepped up their game. Apothecaries began buying fresh corpses from grave robbers, embalming them and desiccating them, and then selling them as mumia. Did I already say I wish I was kidding? Because seriously. Of course, mummies were not the only human flesh we consumed in this time period. Throughout the 16th and 17th centuries, all matter of human bone, blood, and fat were used for their supposed healing properties.
For many generations, the question wasn't, should we eat flesh? It was, what kind of human flesh should we eat?
Let's talk about King Charles II for a few seconds. When he was on his deathbed in 1685, he had a stroke. That's when his doctors decided to administer King's Drops. Now, these innocuous-sounding drops contain a secret ingredient, 5 pounds of crushed human skulls. And not just any skulls. They had to be those of an executed man. The idea was that a young and healthy person who had suffered a violent death was better than an elderly person. In other instances, mossy skulls fermented in horse dung were considered good medicine. Now, maybe eating mummies sounds a bit less weird when we consider this. But of course, this was the same time period in which Europeans were labeling people in South America, quote, savages for their own cultural cannibalism practices. But I mean, I think this is a lot weirder. Now, just to clarify, these practices are not why mummies are, quote, rare. In fact, mummies aren't rare at all. Archaeologists continue to find them all the time. And we also need to remember that even though these are ancient people, they were still people. I have no way of knowing if this poor soul or any part of him was ground up and shoved down the gob of some British aristocrat or used for a painting, but it's probably likely that some of his contemporaries were. The chances are really high. Now, anybody feeling hungry? Not me. Absolute pleasure showing you around some of the weirdest objects in the British Museum today. Of course, I've only covered 8 of them. Do you know of something else in the British Museum that is completely strange and wonderful that you'd like to see me cover in a future video? Or maybe weird object in a different museum anywhere in the world?
leave it in the comments below. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you the next time I'm in the museum.